Hello, and welcome back to Read the World. My name is Derek Main, and I review translated literature. Today, I am reviewing Holiday Heart by Margarita Garcia Robayo, translated by Charlotte Coombe, and if you haven't already guessed from this beautiful and distinctive cover, this is a Charco Press title. The latest Charco Press title. It actually released this week. I'm filming on... what are days anymore? I'm filming on Wednesday. I think it released yesterday. And there was actually, with Margarita and I think with the translator Charlotte Coombe and the, with Charco Press, whose name, I think it's Charlotte Olaf. I'm going to feel terrible if I get that wrong. But with someone from Charco Press as well, they did a Zoom launch, which is cool. Like the first one they've done of those. I purposely actually didn't watch it. I'm hoping that they put it up later because... when I get like in review mode and I'm done with a book, I really want to like have my impressions, you know, and not be primed, especially by an author or translator. I love authors and translators and publishers. They're critical to the thing that I love. But when I hear them talk about the work, it ends up coloring how I view it. So let's start from the beginning. This is a tremendous book. It's wonderful. It fits so well in Charco Press's growing, phenomenal catalog. They have an aesthetic and a style. And what that means, like their books are not similar, but thematically they are all so rich. They all, in my opinion, deal with themes of modern life in very distinctive ways. And I know that that's super vague and super broad, but all I can really connect them with is a cinematic quality. These, you know, maybe I'm stealing that because Ariana Harwitz, one of my favorite writers, who's written two for them now, you know, is so cinematic. Maybe Orphan World, which ended up last year as my best book of the year, and the cinematic quality of that is sort of clouding my judgment. And certainly the cinematic quality of Holiday Heart, which would make the most bizarre, like, marriage movie you could ever see. But they all really do exist in the now in a way, and especially thematically deal with so many issues that are pervasive in our societies. In this one alone, class is an extremely important issue because this is an upper middle class marriage, and they have help, you know, and that help is of a different class, and that relationship between the wife and the maid is very interesting because the wife is so aware of her own privilege and place in that relationship, and it kind of makes her cruel in a way to the maid, to the person that she's hiring, because partially I think of her own guilt. But I've gotten way ahead of myself. Let's do some plot stuff, okay? Holiday Heart, the title, refers to a condition that's kind of like a heart palpitation, and they call it Holiday Heart because apparently it happens when people drink and eat too much on holidays. But you see, I'm recording this outside. There is a bit of a double entendre in Holiday Heart because Holiday Heart, it also feels, and you can see that from the cover too, it feels like a book that exists during holiday, exists in the summer. It is a great summer read, but it's not a summer romance. It's the dissolution of a romance over summer, you know, and so the vibe here, as you can probably hear, a bunch of crickets and other noises and stuff like that, and it's a little odd place for me to film. It's because I read this entirely outdoors in the heat, and it really actually affected the way that the book spoke to me, and I recommend it. So the Holiday Heart, the husband here, who is Pablo, this is Pablo and Lucia, they're Colombian immigrants who have completely settled into American life. She works at Yale. She writes an advice columnish thing for, I think, Vogue. I may have that wrong, but one of those magazines, but kind of a smart one, but like, you know, sort of a feminist type take on, you know, modern marriage and stuff like that, where she's clearly pulling from her own life. And her husband, Pablo, I mean, since it, you know, berates him at times, doesn't always love that. But Pablo and Lucia, Pablo has, in the very beginning, he has the holiday heart condition. So he goes to the hospital, he thinks he's having a heart attack, turns out it's holiday heart. And we find out all of the things that Pablo has been doing. And these are not good things. These are bad things. The affairs of very questionable moral, I mean, affairs are always questionably moral, but these more so, I'll just say. And the drugs and just the way he's living. He's working on a novel, of course. And his novel is kind of an important aspect because it deals with his past and his past geography. So one of the big themes here as immigrants, and successful ones at that, is that I feel Pablo and Lucia have two different perspectives on where they'd like to be in their life. And Pablo is still very much heart and head attached to Colombia, and I don't think he feels settled or American, you know, and I think that his heart and his head lie in Colombia and lie in these islands as well that he visited as a kid. Whereas Lucia is 100% feels like settled in and doesn't want to return, you know, mentally or physically to where she is from. And this is one of the tensions, one of many tensions. And so that part was really, really interesting. Lucia at this time has taken her kids to her parents' apartment in Miami, while Pablo is back at home in New Haven, recovering from the holiday heart. And so one of the really fascinating things about this book is so much of the tension occurs while they are separated by geography. So the geography again becomes super important in this book, like the geography of where they're from and then the geography of the present. But yet that tension is still there. So that's our basic plot recap. We can't go a whole lot further into this happens and this happens. It's fascinating. I want you to read it. And it really does them justice. It does the characters justice, and the story and the narrative is actually really good. But I do want to say that Lucia is who I want to talk about, because she's the most interesting character in this. When you hear a description that a guy is kind of having a midlife crisis, he's working on a novel, he's having a lot of affairs, now he's got holiday heart because he is drinking and doing too much drugs and parading around, he, you know, his wife is very successful, and yet he's like kind of denying their current existence. You automatically, I think, or at least me, place all of the blame on the relationship problems on him, and it feels like a well-trodden and well-understood story because we, men, are jerks. Okay. Not that simple here, because Lucia is tough. She is an anxious ball of energy. She lashes at children, at the help, as we kind of talked about earlier, at the husband. She is so hard on herself, so demanding of what her life should be, and is generally unhappy and feels like she would be an unpleasant person to be around. You see her beauty and you see her vast intelligence. She's a brilliant woman. But it feels like someone that would just be too hard to be in that relationship with, that once she had children, and there is a lot about the children and how that changed her as a person and as a woman, and also how it changed their relationship. And having two children of my own, of course, you know, I know something about that big change, but it affects everyone differently. And one way that I think it affected her, it feels to have affected her, she has become more set in her ways, more strict on herself and others, more anxious of the world around her, fearful, more obsessive on negative thoughts, which we'll get to in a minute, and just closed in as she perhaps makes this motion with the children. You know, as a protector, her nurturing, while coming from a place of love, does not feel lovely. It makes her a terribly interesting character in what is one of the best books I've read this year. I'm going to finish up this recap with two quotes, with this review, with two quotes from the book, as I always do. So the first one, on page 79, is an example of some beautiful writing. I'm going to just read it, and then afterwards I'll say what I wrote down in my notes, because that I just noticed that my note kind of gives away what it's about. Great example of the writing, though. So she is making love right now, Lucia, to someone who is not her husband. She starts laughing again. He is behind her, his arm around her waist. He pushes his pelvis against her buttocks and his nose against her ear. He's snorting like a bull, sweating like a pig. A black pig, thinks Lucia. He grabs her tighter, making her cough slightly. "Let go of me," she says, then remembers that he's a soccer player with very few functioning neurons and thinks about how she should have explained a couple of things to Rosa. Having a crush on a soccer player means foregoing intelligence. "Let me go," she tries again in English. David Rodriguez grabs her hair, yanks it to one side, and kisses the back of her neck. He presses his hefty body against Lucia's back, and she finds it hard to breathe. She puts her head down. She's afraid that the glass will crack. She pushes back, which the guy takes as a provocation. He is panting, displaying all the obvious references to brutish masculinity, to third-rate pornos. Something scares her, how sudden the impulse is. The realization that this guy is 6'6" tall and built like a brick shithouse. If he wanted, he could snap her neck, beat her to death. All men, she says, she remembers, she repeats it to herself like a mantra, are united by their infinite capacity to create violence. Then she throws up. If you can hear that little section and not want to rush out and read this, then you are stronger than I am. That is incredible writing, incredible translation. Thank you, Charlotte Coombe, for that translation. Thank you, Margarita Garcia Robayo, for that writing. And what I had written down was, men show their capacity for violence when they make love. I read that and I realized it was true even of me. Okay? That it's just true. That some of our sexual urges as men, some of the way that we express our sexuality in bed, is a threat to women, even those we love. In this case, there's not love and it's affair. And I've gone off on a weird little tangent here, I agree. But that part affected me quite deeply. And that line that she remembers, right? Like she remembers it and she repeats it like a mantra to herself, because as a woman, she has to know this. All men are united by their infinite capacity to create violence. It's a universal truth. Fantastic section. Last thing I'll read is page 63. And this is going to get at that anxiety and obsessiveness of Lucia. And as you can tell from both my passages, I focus on Lucia. I found Pablo to be typical. There's aspects of his book that he's writing that are very interesting. And of course, his escapades are fun to read because they're at times funny and at times sad. But he's not very multidimensional in the same way. And I don't mean that as a negative on the writing, because I think it's purposeful. He is just sort of sadder. His rejection of his own life in the middle of his life is commonplace, normal. It's just a midlife crisis. It's buying a Ferrari. It's having an affair. But anyway, Lucia is the one that I connected to. So page 63, this is, well, this is what she feels her job is. She always saw herself as a person who was selfish and irresponsible and deeply afraid. In her mind, there constantly lurked the idea of failure and of death. Several times a day, she thinks she might be seeing the last image of her life, in the car's rearview mirror, on her phone screen, in the innocuous face of some supermarket cashier. She carries that unbearable weight around with her. Something is going to explode. That truck is going to jump a red light. That man is carrying a gun. That dog without a muzzle can smell my fear. And in that way, she dies a little every day. She once heard a psychologist saying on the radio that they call this constant fixation on oneself repetitive negative thinking. And Lucia thought, but isn't that my job? So, a beautiful ending there to isn't that my job? Repetitive negative thinking as a mom. You see how she's conditioned herself to believe that? But the two things I want to point out there, the several times a day she thinks she might be seeing the last image of her life is something that I relate to very, very much. I think about that quite a lot. I think about that last moment. And is it blackness or is it whatever, but like, is that the last thing I'll see or say or feel or touch? And to hear someone, a character, well, shit, that's why I read, right? I read so that these characters and these writers and translators say, so that they can give me something that I feel so that I don't feel so alone. I said there was a second thing, but I'm in it right there. I loved Holiday Heart. Thank you, Margarita Garcia Robayo, translated by Charlotte Coombe. And it's Caroline Orloff. Earlier I said Charlotte Orloff, and it's because I mixed those two up. Caroline Orloff is is part of Charco Press. I think she's one half of it. She's the one who did that Zoom, which I am now, as soon as I can edit this thing and put it out into the world, I'm now going to go watch because I'm really into it. Fish Soup was her first, which I really liked. It was before I did reviews, and I don't really go back and review that stuff, but I really liked. But actually, this is great. This is my favorite of her work so far, and it's one of the best things I've read this year. Hope everybody's doing all right. I hope this background noise isn't crazy. I hope I did some sort of justice. I hope you're well. I hope things get better. I have a lot of hope. Be good to folks.